Hello there, you wonderful web-wandering beasts. Brandon Valentine, the Pretentious Fiend here, again with another album review, but this time we're going to be having a look at the debut album from Aaron Frazer, Introducing, which as an album name I'm yet to decide whether I think is remarkably tacky or directly on the money. My hair is very flat and lifeless, and that makes me unhappy. See, the hat exists, so I don't actually have to do my hair. It's a form of laziness. This album was produced by Dan Auerbach of Black Keys fame, such a specific and vintage artist on his own right. But this is absolutely not Aaron Jones's first foray into the world of music, most notably being a core member of Duran Jones and The Indications. But before we get too deep into this review, make sure to like, share, subscribe, join this bizarre cult in which we all listen to me obnoxiously talk about music and art to stave off the non-ending bleak landscape of wild amounts of depression. Now, the first thing you're going to notice about this album is that it is a true, to-the-letter, soul, Motown, vintage album. But immediately something I met with and something I do enjoy is hearing a honest representation of vintage music filtered through modern production and the ability to really get the nuances in that sound, things that may have been missed in older recordings. Normally I do like to talk about the lyrical themes of each song as I'm kind of going track by track, but there will be a little bit of a lack of this in this review because across the board you're dealing with pretty classic themes: love lost and found, innocent infatuation. Kicking off with a track You Don't Want to Be My Baby, with some real classic style, sexy, traveling bass, juxtaposed quite nicely by some fuzzed out little guitar riffs that is very indicative of something like the Black Keys, all acting as a bed for some really nicely toned falsetto vocals from Aaron. With Aaron Frazer's falsetto, there's still a roundness to it, there's a sweetness to it, it's not shrill, it's not thin or harsh, and he is able to express a lot of little nuances within that falsetto. By the time you finish with this first song, you will really notice that authenticity is dripping from this album in terms of the production, in terms of the songwriting. But then cracking straight into the tune, if you got it, we're treated to this much more upbeat, piano-driven kind of track. And it's really once we drop into the verses where a bit more of the instrumentation dissipates off and we're really able to have an intimate moment with Aaron's vocals that you really get the full breadth of how sweet they are and the air that comes off of it. And when we kick into that main riff, it's really that instrumental arrangement that is so authentic. It's tight, it's highly organized, but you're still treated to that little bit of breath and danger. Instrumental danger. When we crack into the track Can't Leave It Alone, we are immediately reminded of the fact that Dan Auerbach is the producer here. This has a distinct Black Keys vibe. It's a little more aggressive, it's a little more gritty, and although Aaron Frazer's falsetto vocals here sit really beautifully and perfectly on top, it would have been nice to hear him come down and join the chaos and get dirty in the mud with the rest of the music a little more. But then we're met with some pretty interesting cuts like Bad News, in which it jazzes things up pretty fucking fast. And the addition of flute in this really adds a bizarre and welcome fourth dimension that expands the kind of sonic diversity that you're experiencing in this album. And finally, yes, for the first time in this whole album, we hear Aaron come off of the pedestal of falsetto in this really great descending vocal cadence that goes beautifully and smoothly all the way from his head voice down into his chest. This track was so charismatic and characteristic, both sonically and aesthetically. Absolute ripper track. But then things get spiced up on the track Have Mercy, where you're met with Latin lounge vibes that are just dripping off the wall, with some kind of bizarre haunted reverbed out Wurlitzers hanging in the background, which is a really fun tone. But the real star here is the backing vocals in this song. They can do no wrong as they paint a sweet yet kind of creepy picture behind. With the track Done Lying, the music ramps up a little more, and whilst it's driven by a harder bass with a bit more of a full-on pulse at a faster pace, the vocals take a kind of very relaxed backseat approach to this song, and you get this kind of loungy Sunday vibe from the vocals on top of something that's a little more charging musically. And on a fairly characteristic album like this, where each song tries to make its own point, this ends up being my least favorite cut. But all is redeemed on the track Lover Girl, where we're met with that funkier, uplifting feeling that at this point in the album we really need, with some really sassy instrumentation and a very doo-wop style vocal delivery. I'm kind of expecting everything he says to be call and response by three guys with quiffs and a light blue suit. And Aaron really uses this track and this doo-wop delivery to explore some really interesting vocal quips and attacks. It ends up being one of the more dynamic and nuanced vocal deliveries on the album. But dropping into the track Ride With Me, when I say it's more modern, it's only slightly more modern, but it is noticeable that this is much more reminiscent of current pop songs than the rest of this album in terms of chord production and the relationship between the vocals and the rhythm. Whilst I was really not taken by this track very much because it did lose a bit of that gritty vintage edge, in the context of the album as an entirety, it was a bit more of a refreshing upbeat hit at this kind of 3/4 mark in the album. Girl on the Phone. I adored the way this song started with this massive piano drop beat that reminds me so much of Joe Cocker's version of With a Little Help from My Friends. And then morphing really smoothly and very cleverly into something that is a bit more infectious, upbeat, and smile-inducing. And I fucking swear this song is speeding up by 1 BPM every 2 bars. I can't prove it, but I'm fucking sure it's happening. And yet again, as I've said before on other tracks, as much as Aaron Frazer's falsetto delivery here is perfect as it is through the rest of the album, I would have loved that when it got to those piano drop parts where it's a bit heavier, a bit gritty, I would have loved to see him come down into the mud a little bit more. The track Love Is really another track that is extremely indicative of this album. It's a soulful, bass pulse driven Motown style track. With the addition of the really heavily reverbed vocals, you get a nice little haunt to it, but it's also these bizarre little stabs in the background of the production that are harpsichords, which is a really odd addition, but just like the flute on previous songs, adds a really nice fourth dimension, especially because in terms of this genre, this is a sort of song I've heard a lot. But, the track Over You. Where has this been hiding the whole time? Why wait until the second last track to drop this absolute f***ing banger? Why, Aaron? Why, Dan? And yes, the vintage elements it does use are not strictly soul or Motown, but what a wonderful melting of the influences. And it's this track that I actually think that Aaron Frazer gets to shine to his fullest, because finally this is the song in which he's letting go a bit more emotively and kind of painting with a sharper, more aggressive brush. Here, he's worried more about the emotion he's getting through, and that's where that sweet juice is. It's the track in which Aaron gets to say, I'm done with your shit, I'ma head the f*** out. Peace. Moral of the story, I absolutely love this track. Hard enjoy. But then straight from this crescendo of energy in the album, we're dropped down into Leaning on Your Everlasting Love. Yeah. This track really sweetens the deal and lounges the f*** out pretty hard. And with Frazer's vocal performance here and the little nuances and the little air and dust on his falsetto being some of the best that he delivers in the entire album here, although it is on top of what for this genre is a pretty standard chord progression and a pretty standard musical cut, but it does play out nicely as the last song of the night at a bar, the closing track, which I'm sure is its intent. All in all, this album is one of the purest cuts of soul and Motown from the modern era that I've heard in a very long time. So it ends up being a very complete and rich tapestry of very authentic tones. That was a really fucking wanky sentence, Brandon. Though my biggest critique of this album, honestly, would be lyrically. Yes, the lyrics work. Yes, they're nice. But in general, they're all fairly standard fare for this kind of a genre. And not to sound harsh, but you can kind of sum up all the lyrics in the song by whatever the song title is going to be. You know the kind of sorrowful longing you're going to hear on tracks like You Don't Want to Be My Baby. You already know. You've heard it all a million times, and I feel like it's unfortunately a missed opportunity, because the music is so authentic, to bring something back from the past and put it through a modern lens with modern anxieties and modern worries. And also I think Aaron should not be afraid in any way to explore the use of his lower register a bit more. For a debut album though, this is a ripping album that I cannot recommend you listen to enough. This album does not bring anything new to the genre whatsoever, but it is really lovely to hear such an authentic and rich tone go through the filter of modern production. I'm really always happy to hear that, because it can give you a slightly new appreciation for the nuances of that music. But most importantly, go have a listen. Let me know what you think in the comments. Like, share, subscribe. Brandon Valentine, the Pretentious Fiend here. I'll catch you all next time.